السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الذي لا إله سواه، والحمد لله، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا مولانا محمد رسول الله وآله وأصحابه ومن والاه. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه، وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم آت أنفسنا تقواها وزكها أنت خير من زكاها، أنت وليها ومولاها. اللهم افتح مسامع قلوبنا لذكرك. اللهم اجعلنا من الذين يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. اللهم لا تكلنا إلى أنفسنا طرفة عين، وأصلح لنا شأننا كله، لا إله إلا أنت. اللهم إنا بك وإليك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. We continue in our progressive, incremental quest inside the envelope of Tazkiyatun Nafs, as I began to share with you an aspect of the Qur'an of many that emphasize the importance of Tazkiyatun Nafs, and this one I personally deem it to be perhaps the most powerful of the ayat of the Qur'an, which emphasizes the primary nature of importance, that is, of Tazkiyatun Nafs. Allah, in the ayat I recited to you from the surah, which I think you all know, Surah Ash-Shams. And Allah Azza wa Jal is essentially yuqsimu, Allah Azza wa Jal. That Allah Azza wa Jal yuqsim, a qasam. He swears by, yuqsim. And God subhanahu wa ta'ala, huwa khaliqu kulli shay, is the creator of everything. Everything besides, outside, and again the word outside is just a word, but the meaning of outside is here intellectual rather than physical. Anything outside of Allah Azza wa Jal is makhluk, is a creation. So when Allah Azza wa Jal swears by something that is makhluk, He may do that because it is His creation. If He swears by it subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is nothing whatsoever that makes Him subhanahu wa ta'ala potentially subject to worship of it, shirk. It's not even theoretically, intellectually possible. But if we do that, if I swear by a creation, there is indeed the possibility, theoretically and practically, potentially, that one may be or may end up worshipping that object. هذه واحدة. Secondly, when He subhanahu wa ta'ala does that, as some ulama have pointed out, rahimahullah ta'ala, is to also to draw our attention to that which He is swearing by as a creation of Allah Azza wa Jal, and what it ought to engender in our minds and hearts of awe for Allah Azza wa Jal who created that. Let's see that. وَالشَّمْسِ waw al-qasam, as you know here. It's not waw al-atf, of course. In grammar, in the Arabic language, this waw is waw al-qasam. How do I recognize it? When the noun that comes after it has a kasra. wa shamsi. Wallahi. We say wallah. Wallahi. If you say wallahu, that's not qasam, that's something else. Wallahi. Washamsi. That's qasam. By the sun. Washamsi. As though he's telling us, drawn our attention here to, do you know what it takes to create a shams? In your balance, in the way you understand it, in your knowledge, in your human ability to understand, do you know what a shams is? Study the sun and the nature of the sun and the evolution of the sun and what it comprises of, the makeup of the sun, what happens inside the sun, how long has it been there, how we benefit from its heat and light without being subject to its harm. Washamsi. Do you know what is a shams? That's for example, it's a body that is millions and millions of times more than Earth. Inside of it, it's all incredible nuclear and subnuclear reactions, fission and fusion reactions. That if Earth were closer to the sun, even by something of a distance to us insignificant, life on Earth would be impossible because of what the sun would do to Earth, the rays of the sun. And if the Earth were not protected by a layer of ozone, for example, that the rays, the ultraviolet rays from the sun would make life impossible on Earth. And you can go on. If we started that would be a course in astrophysics. Washamsi, by the sun. Subhanallah. In other words, drawing our attention to Allah's qudra, to Allah's ilm, to Allah's knowledge, to Allah's control of all of the events, how He, with that sun and what it is, He makes life possible on earth, benefiting from the sun and not being subject to its harmful, devastating effects. When Akhirah will come, when the last day will come, Rasulullah Mawlana Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam tells us that the sun will be made to approach earth. How did he know these things 14 centuries ago? It will be made to approach the sun, to the earth, to the extent that human beings will be in a situation in Akhirah, in a situation where they would live. Allah will sustain them, but they would live in an incredible agony because of the effects of the heat, and somehow Allah will protect the human beings from being subject to rays that will kill them immediately, but only screens that which will make them then those who will live then. And they, before resurrection, subject to this hardship. By the sun approaching the earth. And therefore allowing the effect, some of the effects of the sun as Allah created it to be manifested. and He will screen others. وَالشَّمْسِ. Subhanallah. And this Shams is, again, and like other stars and galaxies and planets, are suspended in space-time. They don't fall on you. By the, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the exact ratios of gravitational field to be subjected to, and distance, so that it doesn't fall. Why doesn't the moon fall on the earth, or the earth fall into the sun? Again, the subhanahu wa ta'ala created, which we calculate approximately nowadays, of distances and gravitational fields, so that that does not happen. And the rotational movement, the centrifugal rotational movement, all of that is in due measure, so that none of that destructive, apocalyptic event would occur at any time, except by His permission. وَإِنَّا كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَاهُ بِقَدَرٍ, says Allah Azza wa Jal. Verily, everything we created in due measure. It is so in due measure that the brightest of scientists now attempt to write that in equations. It is foreseeable. It is, you can anticipate it because it is laws. Exact laws. You are helped to discover. Discover is when we find something that already exists. So we discover the laws that already exist, that Allah made, and He allows us, and He wants us sometimes to discover some of those, to lead us to realize the greatness of His Lordship subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالشَّمْسِ, second, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, another qasam, another qasam, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, ضُحَاهَا, the duha of it. The duha of it. And that is the light that it produces. Especially the light that it produces, that is the gentler light, the gentler heat in the duha time, between shuruq and midday, in between somewhere. What duha? Well, did that come by itself? Do you know what it takes to produce duha? In due measures? Try it. وَالضُّحَى, in one surah, وَضُحَاهَا. Drawn our attention to what it is, this phenomenon of duha, and what is behind it that you don't see and you don't perceive, but you may learn about. And if you learn, that should lead you to realize the one who designed that to be that way, who created it and designed it to be that way. And He designed it in eternity. It's not like you and me. I have to always constantly make changes, make sure it works. And a machine we make, it ends up 50 years, 100 years, it's gone. A car, you have to change a car if it's a very good car, every 15 years. And you have to keep changing it. And you have to keep, mending it and repairing it. He created you, and He created all of these things programmed before there was anything, and they continue to function. Duha will be duha. Shams will be shams for as long as we live, and more until the schedule appointed for each thing. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you know what it takes to produce duha? وَضُحَاهَا وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ, and by the moon. Again, drawing our attention to this celestial object also we call the moon, al-qamar, and you take for granted. Do you know what's behind it? Wal-qamari. Do you know what's behind it? And again, in that relationship suspended in space-time to Earth, and what it does, and how it affects Earth, and how it affects the tides in the oceans and the seas, and how it affects your day and your night and your lives. And this enormous thing, and yet it doesn't fall on you, you don't fall on it. وَهَكَذَا إِذَا تَلَاهَا, and the light it produces, and as it follows the sun sets, the moon sets afterwards. The sun rises, the moon rises afterwards. When the sun sets in the first half of the month, for example, in the lunar calendar, you have the light of the moon. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا. And that process of following, do you think you take it for granted? Do you know what's behind it? وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا وَالنَّهَارِ, and by the day, إِذَا جَلَّاهَا. And the day is not something to be taken for granted. We do take it for granted because it's been like this for as long as we remember as human beings. And that which we take for granted, which we are used always, do you know what's behind it? You take it for granted. Qudratullah Azza wa Jal. وَالنَّهَارِ, to produce daylight. The fact that Earth is rotating around itself and around the sun, and the sun is in its own motion rotating around itself in somewhere in the galaxy, in some distance from us, and how the day is produced for you to benefit from without harming you. Do you take it for granted? وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا, as it uncovers the brightness of the sun. What it uncovers removes darkness. إِذَا جَلَّاهَا, you take that for granted? Could you have designed this and thought of this? The fact that there is the sun and the moon and the earth is created, spheroidal, and as it rotates, that's how, relative to the sun, that's how day and night comes. Would you have thought of it? Would you have designed it that way? And would you have made it? قُلْ لَوْ إِنْ اجْتَمَعَتِ الْإِنسُ وَالْجِنُّ. If all the efforts of all creatures were to come together to produce the like of an ayah, let alone to produce this magnificent order in creation. This is, as we look at the celestial objects, if we look at the internal microorganisms and subatomic levels, it's mind-numbing. وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا وَاللَّيْلِ, and by the night, إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا, as it overrides or overwhelms the creation, the earth, the people. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا, etc. وَالسَّمَاءِ وَمَا بَنَاهَا, and this sama, this space around you, what it takes, and by that which built it, fashioned it, designed it, and you know what it takes. وَمَا بَنَاهَا, either it means بِمَعْنَى وَمَنْ بَنَاهَا, وَالسَّمَاءِ, by the heavens, by space-time, وَمَا بَنَاهَا, and by he who created it. Or وَمَا بَنَاهَا, وَمَا بَنَاهَا meaning what made it, what it takes to make it. وَمَا بَنَاهَا وَالسَّمَاءِ وَمَا بَنَاهَا وَالْأَرْضِ, this earth in which you live, by the earth. Do you know what it takes? وَمَا طَحَاهَا, this earth that is spheroidal, when you realized it to be spheroidal, yet when you live in it, do you see spheroidality? Do you see the fact that it is round? No, you don't. What are you enjoying? The fact that it looks مسطحة, مدحوة, مطحية, or مطحوة, والأرض وما طحاها, and what it takes to make it expanded, looking flat. You know, usually when we design, you know, spheroidal or spherical objects, we know that it is curved. And anything we design relative to what we are going to see it and experience it as spherical or spheroidal. But the fact that you experience Earth, which is spheroidal, as flat for your life, it's not something to be taken for granted. It's not something normal. No, it is not. SubhanAllah, it is curved, but you don't experience it as curved. You experience it as flat, to live on it. And the more you walk on earth, the more the earth looks what? Still flat. You will never know that it is round unless, what do? Two things. Yeah, if you go outer space, before, didn't have to go out to outer space. From one point, you keep walking straight, on a straight line, never deviating 1/60th of a degree or so. You keep going straight. Where will you end up after a long while? In the same spot you began from. SubhanAllah, what is that? If you think, then you realize, and most people would not understand that unless you're some mathematician or something like that in the old days, then you realize that means, God, this space in which I am, I was walking straight, and I end up in my same spot. I mean, I was walking on a curved space, which is a sphere. How could it be possible? I walked, look at this straight. And this is what you will always see, like you see here. But it is not what you see. وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا طَحَاهَا وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا. After using these types of qasam, these types of oaths and pledges and swearings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changes to another one. From this sort of celestial objects, using them as qasam subhanahu wa ta'ala, he goes to the nafs. Wa nafsin, the last one. Wa ma sawaha, and by the nafs. Wa ma sawaha, and what? And by that which, or by he who, sawa, the nafs, fashioned the nafs. Sawa. How? فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا. And consequently, أَلْهَمَهَا, informed it, inspired it of the way to its wickedness and the way to its righteousness. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Now, when he subhanahu wa ta'ala swore by all of those, then he comes to وَنَفْسٍ, and by the nafs. And you know what the nafs is. And what it takes to make a nafs, design a nafs, and fashion a nafs, to be with cognition, to be with life, to be with choice, to be with characteristics. Do you know what that is? وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا. Now it seems to me that when he subhanahu wa ta'ala closed the aqsam, the qasam, and ended up, before that there were 9 of them. You count 9. Then وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا, 2 more, total of 11. 9 before he comes to the nafs. The nafs in association comes in association with those aqsam that are enormous in meaning, as though all of those versus the nafs, it's like the fashioning of the nafs is something like that. Or maybe more important and greater. That's why our ulama, rahimahumullah ta'ala, and our saintly expert scholars speak of our nufus, our internal, our the human being, as the micro universe. That everything in the universe of meanings is reflected in this micro universe, the human being's reality. The sifat of the human being, the attributes of the human being, the nafs of the human being, the ruh of the human being, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His hikmah shows us that we are in this space-time, in this universe, we exist, and He subhanahu wa ta'ala made us reflections, projections of that entire creation. You can look at it in this way. The concept of what? The concept of the ability now in current technology to make the same thing that is in a huge volume, to make it in a very small volume. That's called what? Can't hear you well. Sorry? What is that? Well, that's very nanotechnology. So, but the process of miniaturization, the concept of miniaturization, you know, the greater you are as a scientist and you have rich technology, the more ability to build certain things that are smaller, that and are complex, that perform functions that you could not do before except by building this enormous thing. Like, for example, the progress in computers. The earliest computers, if you probably, I don't know whether you have ever seen pictures of that, and how the concept started with light bulbs and just to make an addition and a subtraction in the entire room. An entire room is used of bulbs and wires, etc., to be able to make an addition and subtraction. And then to develop and develop to end up, Ya Latif, with what you have in your pockets, which you call what? They call them for you smartphones, which are not smartphones, which are what I call, which you know, they are supercomputers. Those are actually supercomputers, more developed than the computers they used to send from the United States astronauts on the moon. Did you know that? That smartphone that you have is more sophisticated than the computers it took in the 60s to land them on the moon. That's a fact. At least million times. So that type of information, at that level I didn't know. But that they are much more sophisticated than the computers they used to land the astronauts on the moon. Miniaturization. With a lot more information. The information inside of you as a human being. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا. You cannot imagine. You cannot imagine. If you take a cell, just a cell, la ilaha illallah, and what's inside a cell, which is invisible to the naked eye, inside the cell, the complexity of the functions in that cell, if you were to build them externally, it will be like a city bigger than London, with all its the routes and the processes that are there inside this miniature, invisible to the eye, one cell. This micro-universe. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. This is not just a physical thing. This is not just a machine. فُجُورٌ وَتَقْوَاهَا. This is a living and a spiritually living being created. This is a nafs with the potential for choice of evil and the potential for choice of virtue and good. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Within it is built in, أَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا, is built in within it this potential and ability to choose and to recognize evil and good. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Now this is al-qasam. This is al-qasam. 11 of them. One after the other, concluding with this most momentous qasam. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. And again, we can build a course really on وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, and we include in them probably all the disciplines of knowledge that humans have reached at this point, and the latest advancements in all of these sciences to elaborate on وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. But we're not going to do that. The result is Jawabul Qasam. There is Qasam and there is Jawabul Qasam. The answer of that Qasam, I swear, what? When you say, Wallahi, this is true. Wallahi, this is false. Wallahi, I'm going to do this. Wallahi, I'm not going to do that. Wallahi, I understand you. Wallahi, I don't understand you. Wallahi, I like you. Those I like you, understand you, they are called Jawabul Qasam. Qasam in the Arabic language, verses, always when there is a qasam, where is? You have to look. Where is Jawabul Qasam? Where is the answer to this qasam? In other words, why this qasam? Upon what is this qasam? Why this qasam? قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. This is why all of those qasam. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Subhanallah. وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. The answer to all of that is, why all of that? Why that emphasis? While of those qasam, it doesn't exist anywhere else in the Qur'an like this. That those who, and the person who, the man who, the woman who cleanses the nafs. Cleanses the nafs, performs tazkiyah upon the nafs, purges the nafs, washes the nafs, purifies the nafs, disciplines the nafs, zakkaha, raises the nafs, elevates the nafs, helps it grow and mature properly. That's all in the word zakka, because of the many etymological meanings contained in the word zakah and zakka and tazakka. The one who does that, قد في اللغة العربية في النحو, in this case, for what? قد ليس للتأكيد. More accurately, it's not للتأكيد, للتحقيق. قد مع إذا جاءت قد مع الفعل الماضي للتحقيق. That قد أفلح. تأكيد is a nuance. There is nuance between تأكيد and تحقيق. قد أفلح من زكاها. In other words, the one who does that, قد أفلح. His falah, in other words, his success, in other words, his true happiness, قد أفلح, is guaranteed, has happened. كأنها تحققت للتحقيق. قد أفلح من زكاها. And Allah Azza wa Jal in this powerful ayat, in this surah, tells us very powerfully, but very eloquently, very beautifully, in a very eloquent, condensed, miniaturized way. He told us so much in so little. But it's very clear that the person who is in tazkiyah of his or her nafs, whose endeavor, who takes on this task and fulfills it, has attained felicity, has attained happiness, and will therefore, meaning attain it. قد أفلح, as though it happened in the past. About the future, and uses the past because the past is something we're sure that it happened. And therefore, as he speaks of the future in the past tense, emphasizing the fact that it will happen. For sure. قد أفلح من زكاها. Not only that, the opposite is also true. بمفهوم المخالفة. وقد خاب من دساها. قد, similarly, قد خاب. Khayba is failure. You know, you say to me, I asked you, I relied on you to help me, لكن خيبت أملي. لكن خيبت أملي. You betrayed my trust. You failed me. You failed my trust. Khaba is the verb. Khaba man dassaha, i.e., the person who dassaha instead of zakkaha. Dassaha means dassa yadussu, which means to conceal and to hide and to override. The person who, instead of exposing the nafs to deal with it, to discipline it, to heal it, to cure it, to change it, instead, what does he or she do? Conceals it, hides it. I'm fine, there's nothing wrong with me. Accepts, false notion about his own self. Instead of exposing the nafs and what it really is, to change it and heal it, he or she instead, I have no problem, and continues to indulge it. And therefore the commission of what? Sins. Dhunub. And therefore with the commission of dhunub, the nafs is even more buried under the ground of evil and of sins. And it is suffocated. Khaba, the person who does that. The person who does that to his own nafs, instead of the earlier choice, his destiny or her destiny is khayba. And I explained to you what khayba means. Qad, for sure. The outcome, for sure, is khayba, failure. And what is the ultimate failure? Is to end up where? In Jahannam. Wal-'iyadhu billah. And what is the ultimate success and happiness? In one word? Jannah. Without the sophistications of before that. That's the ultimate end. And before that, in this dunya, there is failure. Or in this dunya, there is also, alhamdulillah, comfort. And there is peace. And there is serenity. There is security. And there is hana. And there is, alhamdulillah, rida. And there is tibul aish. As Allah Azza wa Jal indicates to us also in so many places in the Qur'an and in the Sunnah of His Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. It is this powerful. Why tazkiyatun nafs? He who created the nafs, wa nafsin wa ma sawaha, he who created it, wa nafsin wa ma sawaha, wa ma, I told you either wa man sawaha or wa ma sawaha, what it takes to make the nafs, or by the one who made the nafs. He is telling you and me, if you don't take care of this nafs, this is where you will end up. I created it. I made it. I am telling you. If you use it in this way, this is the result. If you use it in that way, that is the result. Spare yourself the burden of trying to find out, and human beings are still, those who don't believe in these things, are still inventing and innovating ways to understand, so to say, so to speak, to understand the human self. And there is psychology this and psychology that. And there are as many psychologies as there is a notion of what is a human being. It's very interesting. Do you see what I just said and what it means? Psychology is about knowing the nafs, they say. But in Psychology 101 you learn, and I learned that in Psych 101, that there are as many psychologies as there are answers to the question, what is a human being? Did you hear that? But psychology is about to tell me what a human being, what a human nafs is. Well, but it is saying the human nafs, that which tells you what is the human nafs, depends on what it knows about the human nafs as it relates to itself. So there are many psychologies. Each psychology depends on how you define a human nafs, the human psyche, the human person. So he's telling you, he who created the nafs. Ultimately, there is only one psychology, ultimately, in the haqiqah. But in the world, there are many psychologies. The ultimate psychology is by the one who created the psyche. And he's telling me and telling you, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. At this moment in this hal, as though what came next, كذبت. Do you feel now what came next? كذبت ثمود بتقواها. كذبت. With all of this, the answer, the average answer of most human beings is takdhib. كذبت. They denied. They rejected. They did not accept. And most human beings will not accept this offer from the divine about who you are, who we are, and what we are, and what we need to do. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم وصلى اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا مولانا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق معلن الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراط الله المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.